Hey, friend, are you feeling overwhelmed by emotions, especially in parenting, marriage, or work? Then listen up. I love helping women learn and implement powerful emotional management tools in a small group environment so they can handle everyday feelings with more calm, more clarity, and more confidence. It's called the Emotional Confidence Club. And right now, we're open to new members. If you're ready for more peace and less stress in your life, apply now for the Emotional Confidence Club at aliciamichelle.com/club. Hi, I'm Alicia Michelle, best-selling author and ICF certified Christian mindset coach. I've helped tens of thousands discover how to build emotional confidence using practical, science, and scripture-based mindset tools. If you're ready for less overwhelm, healthier relationships, and more calm and freedom in Christ, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Christian Mindset Coach with me, Alicia Michelle. If you saw the title of today's episode, then you know that today is a challenging to talk about kind of topic, but it's a topic that if I could pick one thing that a lot of my clients struggle with, it has to do with their own relationships with their parents and some of the struggles they have with their parents not being able to process some of the feelings that they have. This situation of being a child of an emotionally immature parent. And that could look like lots of different things. But there is this phenomenon that happens if you are like me, where you have had a period in your life where maybe you didn't know a lot about your feelings or didn't have a lot of understanding of emotions. And then suddenly you've grown. And obviously, a lot of you know about my story of how I have dramatically grown and God has coached me and counseled me. And I have training now in all these areas with emotions. If we've had that journey, then we can get to a place where we want to have deeper connections with loved ones, especially those who are close to us. So I want to unpack today how we can stay emotionally healthy while loving and putting boundaries around our own hearts and loving our parents well if they are emotionally immature. Now, there are all kinds of emotions that just come up being in this sort of situation: confusion, unmet expectations, grief, guilt. There's a lot. And a lot of us have no idea what to do with this. We struggle with it. We think, is it just me? How do I fix it? It doesn't feel like things are going to change in this area. So, what do I do with all I'm feeling? A lot of this goes back to this question of what do you do when you love your parent, but they continue to hurt you over and over? And you don't really see a sign of it changing. Maybe you've addressed it and you're like, so now what? So the goal of this episode is to offer practical and spiritual support to navigate this very challenging dynamic with grace, with wisdom, with emotional safety, with an understanding of where your responsibility in this comes and where it ends, and your ability to release and let go of some things as part of this relationship. There's a lot of stuff here that we could unpack, and we're going to try to at least touch on some of these areas in the next 35 minutes together because it is such a hot topic. And I will say from the very beginning that because it is such a hot topic, because there's only so much we can cover here, please, if this is something that resonates with you, please reach out to me. It's as simple as emailing me, alicia@aliciamichelle.com. So it's ALICIAMICHELLE, aliciamichelle.com. Just let me know the name of this episode. You can say emotionally immature parents in the subject title, and I would love to have a conversation with you about it. There's a couple of other episodes that I'm going to reference here that talk about friendships, relationships, boundaries. So 296, which is, are you an emotionally toxic friendship? Episode 233, which is about boundaries in family and friendships. Episode 282 is emotional responsibility, how to stop owning others' feelings and taking charge of your own. Episode 299 is emotions in marriage. When should you share? When should you not share? And then episodes 277 to 279, this is where we talk about the A.D.D method the acknowledge, discern, and decide emotional management tool that I teach. I talk about it in my book, Emotional Confidence. If you want to get an inside look into what those steps are, episodes 277 to 279 cover that as well. Okay, let's get into this. Understanding, what does this look like to have an emotionally immature parent? If you're not sure what that looks like, there's a really great book. It's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. It's by Lindsay Gibson. Great book. There's several spin-off books that have been done from that main book. But some of the ways that it's defined is this parent could appear as emotionally self-centered, meaning that the world is always about them. They're easily overwhelmed by stress, by conflict. They avoid emotional responsibility. It's always about the other person. They're never taking responsibility for how they played a part in it. They lack empathy or the ability to validate your emotions. Another important facet to this, and why this can be so damaging and so frustrating, is they just may not be able to see what you're feeling. They may not have the ability to even go there. If you find that they're always redirecting the conversation somehow to, it's always about them and always about what they need and how things are always hurting them and about them, that's another sign. And also, they're unable to engage in deep or mutual emotional conversations. So if you've tried to come to them and say, hey, I'm really, for example, I'm struggling with this in my career, or having this issue in parenting or in my marriage, and they're like, yeah. So anyway, what's happening? And blah, blah, blah. And they completely redirect the conversation. If you've ever been in that sort of a situation, then that's an example of they're not able to engage in these deep conversations. All of these things we just mentioned, if you're raising your hand, yeah, I definitely can see that in the relationship with my parents. Or if you're married, your in-laws, you can tell us firsthand what it's like to feel the ramification of that, to feel the confusion around how you're supposed to still love them and care for them when you are hurt over and over by these things and you don't understand them. You don't understand why it's different. And this is grief. We have to acknowledge the grief of this. It really is a form of grief. And I use that word not flippantly, but there is a grieving that needs to happen in realizing that this parent will never be the parent that we want them to be, that we hoped we could have. Now, let me just say that if that is you, I have seen many examples of when God allows that to happen, where you are in a relationship with a parent, for example, who is not able to go there emotionally with you, who brings up these other emotional issues, avoiding responsibility, playing the victim, all these sorts of things. That God is so faithful, first of all, to understand and help us work through it, number one. And number two, he is faithful in bringing other people into your life who can help model some of these parental roles, maybe that you wish a parent could have fulfilled. So it's never an easy topic to work through, and everyone's journey is going to be a little different, but it is grief. And some would even go so far as to describe it as emotional orphaning. They're still involved in your life, but they aren't able to show up in the way that your soul has always longed for. That is a huge loss to grieve. And it's okay to say that. It's okay. Understanding first that it is a loss, acknowledging the loss of it. And understanding how a lot of times with these emotionally immature parents, there is narcissism that's accompanying it. These tendencies of constantly centering the conversations back on themselves, the downplaying or invalidating your needs, using guilt to manipulate, demanding loyalty or access without reciprocity. Yeah, that's narcissism. And you can see why it often goes part and parcel with the emotionally immature parent tendency or that typical stereotype. One of the biggest truths I want you to hear from the beginning here is that you are not responsible for fixing or fulfilling your parent emotionally. It's not your job, friend. It's not your job to fix them emotionally. That's God's job. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop the dysfunction from moving on to the next generation for them. And maybe that can help lead them to freedom, but more for your own freedom and for the freedom of those who are coming behind you, your children, and even your grandchildren. You and I, whoever would be in this situation, there is a power to stop that dysfunction, no matter what the situation is today. So we're not responsible for fixing or fulfilling our parents emotionally, but we are in charge of stopping the dysfunction by working on it from our perspective. Let's talk about some of the traps that come along with this as we're working through it. A lot of times guilt plays a part in it, people pleasing. It's very easy for people pleasing to become a part of it if that's part of your natural bent anyway, because maybe you've learned that if my parent acts like this and I just do what they want me to do, then everything's fine. And so I keep the peace by just going along with their sometimes craziness and how they're looking at it and just saying, okay, mom, or okay, dad. And you just put up with it for a little bit. The guilt behind it, if I was to do something different, then I'm bad. If I say no, I'm being a bad daughter. The guilt of it's my, again, like we were saying before, it's my job to change them. It's my job to make them see, or to maybe if I communicate in this way, they'll see it differently. But we are wired by God to have a connection with our parents, to feel their love. That is something that is hardwired in us. So we have to understand that grief is always a result of a loss of love. Grief is always a loss of some sort, and in this case, love. It's that result. We have to understand that loss sometimes means there is no way to explain it better. There is no way for us to try to, maybe if I do this, it'll make them happy. I'm not saying people can't change because they can, but we need to help ourselves stop stepping into those traps. We have to stop stepping in the traps that are set for us. I believe 1,000% that the enemy has traps that he tries to set up in our life. I'm not saying like we need to worry about demons around every corner, but I will say that we are in a battle. The Bible is very clear about that. And that if he can use little things like this, big things like this, however the degree of it is in your relationship with your parents, if he can set us up like that and we step into it every time, he's going to keep throwing that trap down. Do you understand? So we get to decide if we're going to step in that trap. It doesn't mean that the trap is not there. It doesn't mean that the pain isn't real, that whatever action did or did not happen, but it is a decision on our part on whether or not we are going to step into the trap. There was someone who had shared with me recently about a frustration that she's experiencing with her own mother. This is someone who had a successful career, is a mom of 4 amazing girls, has done all these great things in her life. And she was confessing that there is this brokenness inside of her because of this emotionally immature parent that she has. And she was asking for prayer and just for help in this situation. And here's how she described it, this conflict that we feel when we're trying to help an emotionally immature parent because we want to help them. She says, I feel my duty and obligation is to care for her and to protect her. I would like to show up for her like I have and somehow not need her thank you of recognition or for her to finally be happy and positive.
Hey there, it's Alicia. Do you love the science and scripture-based tools that we talk about here on the show, but want some accountability and practical help applying these principles to your life? Well, then you're invited to apply for the Emotional Confidence Club. I like to think of the club as the lab where we implement the tools that we talk about here and in my book, Emotional Confidence. Imagine having the chance to interact with me live every week as you practice the 7 emotional management tools in our roadmap to help you manage emotions like fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, anger, and more. I love watching the lives of the women in the club transform in incredible ways, moving from overwhelmed and frustrated to calm and confident. You too can learn how to make these truths applicable to your situations and find emotional peace despite life's ongoing stress. Right now, we are welcoming in new members, but it is by application only. Does this sort of accountability, growth, and caring support as you apply these tools to your life, does that sound good to you? Then apply now for the Emotional Confidence Club at aliciamichelle.com/club. That's aliciamichelle.com/club.
Again, there is this little girl who is longing to be seen by her parents in a way that is meaningful for her. To say, I so value how you show up in my life. A little girl longing for a relationship with her mom. That's what I hear in this. And a little girl who is broken again and again when she tries to have that relationship and she has that expectation of this time, maybe this time, she will recognize that I am helpful, that I am caring for her. Maybe she'll finally see that. And every time there is this disappointment, and it's such a cycle we can get stuck in so easily. This trap of this emotional enmeshment where we confuse love with obligation. When we begin to take on these emotional burdens that were never ours to carry, or we believe that peace in the relationship depends on our constant sacrificing, that the only way to keep things happy is if I just keep doing things her way. If I keep that people pleasing trap, if I just keep the peace, I don't say anything about it, I can deal with my own pain on the inside. How many of us stay in that place? I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to do the good girl thing, but I'm going to hold all of this inside and deal with it later. But the problem is all of that holding it in inside has consequences on our body and our soul and our mind, our personality, our other relationships. It's like that pot of boiling water. If you haven't heard me talk about this, it's the idea of a pot of boiling water on a stove. We are the pot. The boiling water inside is our emotions. Fire underneath us is the stress in life. And it's our job continually, as just this discipline of being a human in a messed up world, to monitor the level. How much boiling water is happening in there? Is it overflowing? Is it just halfway? It's always probably going to be at least a simmer, right? And we can't always control that fire underneath, but we get to decide how much of that steam will be in there. And in these situations of emotional, immature parents, and we're dealing with them, we're trying to help them, we think, okay, I'm just going to let that come in. But when that comes in, that is just increasing the temperature of that water in that pot. It is making it more and more hot, more pressure. It's building, and that has to go somewhere. So this is why we have to figure out what to do with it, because the reality is this other person or persons, if you're talking about more than one parent, they may never change. They may never be any different. God, in his power, could come down and change them. 100% true. But if they don't ever change, we cannot live in the hope that they will. We can change how we react and protect ourselves from the traps that the enemy wants to set. We get to decide and notice when we are feeling the effects of their own immaturity and what we can do about it. We have control from that perspective. When that heat inevitably will start to increase, because it is a lifelong wound sometimes. It gets easier to deal with the longer we walk with it, because we can start to see how some of the healthy choices we make us feel better. But there's an area that we're continually bumping into in a relationship. If that isn't changing, it is still going to be something that may be a lifelong issue that God is using to refine us and change us. So I want to just say that if you feel these things, that this is part of the process, that there's nothing wrong with you. This is a natural reaction to being in a relationship with someone who is emotionally immature, and especially when it is in a parent and child sort of role, because we want to, and we're wired to please our parents. We want them to think that we are doing great. We want to love them back. We're wired with that. And when there is brokenness in that, It hurts. Bottom line, a couple of verses that I want to share here. Just this first one, Colossians 3:23. It says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for a human master." We serve an audience of one. That audience of one is Jesus. So we can serve others, but it comes by first serving Christ. Everything we do starts with serving Christ, and we serve others from the overflow of serving Christ. So that means that if we are working to perform for approval or to please, to keep the peace, are we working for the Lord in that moment? Honestly, the answer is maybe. Like we could be. We could be working just because it might be very, in that specific moment, it might be godly to be that humble person in the relationship who says, I'm going to be the peacemaker here. But when there is a pattern of saying, I can't upset the apple cart, that's a sign of dysfunction. That is not healthy servanthood. That's dysfunction. That's what we're talking about. That is what it means to serve man versus serving God as our master. And that includes our parents. When we get stuck in people pleasing, it's often that sign that we have forgotten, not that we've forgotten who we answer to, but that our decisions and our thoughts are keeping us from fully serving God. When we talk about being able to take responsibility for our part in this, a lot of times it looks like boundaries. And it can feel in these sort of situations where we have an emotionally immature parent, it can be terrifying. It can be terrifying to think, I'm going to say this to that person. That takes a ton of courage. And it also can really upset us emotionally. So we need to know what to do with our own emotions as we're walking through and making that decision. And of course, the potential backlash that may come from it and how we deal with it. That's where the A.D.D model, the acknowledge, discern, and decide model that I teach in the Emotional Confidence Club, which is my membership to help women learn how to manage emotions well in real time. But I want to walk you through quickly how to use A.D.D in these sort of situations where we're really conflicted and frustrated and overwhelmed and fearful and all of the feels when we're dealing with how do we set up and take responsibility for our part of managing from a healthy perspective an emotionally immature parent. So acknowledge is the first step. So we're acknowledging why it makes sense, some of the feelings that we're having, acknowledging the emotions that this parent stirs up in us, whether that's anxiety, frustration, sadness, guilt, seeing these as actual things that are happening and seeing them not as I'm a bad daughter for feeling like this, but seeing them as reasonable responses to the behavior and feeling the compassion of God through that. That when we sense this dysfunction in a relationship, that God sees it and he doesn't like it either. It's part of his broken world to have dysfunction. So he sees it and he sympathizes with us in it. So we can feel the feeling and know that God is in alignment with his frustration that it's happening. So we can feel that compassion. And then we can discern, okay, what is true about what I'm feeling about this and what isn't true about this? Is it true that they are being harmful with how they're speaking to me or what they're not saying to me or how they're treating this situation, how they handle things? That may not be the case, depending on what the truth is. Maybe we have the filter on where we're seeing it, like we've seen it for so long that it's something we're assuming and it's not even there. Or is it really something that's going on that others are noticing it's a real thing? But here's the thing. Are we adding to it, even if it's true, honestly? Are we adding to the dysfunction and making it harder to work through by adding in unrealistic expectations? Friend, I have to ask you this question. It's a hard question. Are you expecting this emotionally immature parent to be someone that they are incapable of being? Are you asking them to do that? We really want them to be different. We really want them to change if that's your situation and your story. But sometimes we get so locked up in these emotional spirals about having an emotionally immature parent because we keep expecting them to be different. And that's part of that trap thing we were talking about before. The trap gets set and it's waiting there. We get a choice to step into it or not. So in this discern step, we get to decide, is that a truth about the situation? It may be accurate, but am I letting that truth become this whole other thing that I'm adding to the pain by adding to the dysfunction by doing that? Am I adding other thoughts like maybe they don't love me? Maybe they think that I'm not a good enough daughter. Maybe they think that I should be different. Are we adding to what they are really saying in these situations? What do they think they're communicating? Because in my experience with working with people who've struggled with this, it seems like the parent is unaware of their behavior. And in their mind, they're not being unloving. They're not being in any way communicating anything but what they think is acceptance, care. They are not emotionally able to process their own feelings. So why would they think that what they're doing is hurting someone else? They're not able to even go there. If we understand that their perspective on it is not intending to be harmful, which most situations, like there may be parents out there who they're just being harmful and they know it. But in a majority of situations, they don't even really realize they're being harmful. Even if we've told them they're being harmful, maybe then they label you as sensitive and all these things. The point is, their intention is to be different than how you are receiving it. So in this second step of discern, we get to decide, how are we going to receive what they are putting out? Are we going to use it as a chance to step into that trap? Or are we going to say, it may be true that this is what I'm receiving, but I'm not going to assume that's what the reality is. I am going to choose a different way to respond to this and not step into that trap. I'm going to stop believing they're going to be different or having these unrealistic expectations. And also understanding that next step, which is to decide. We are responsible for dealing with our own emotional health. So the next step says, what do I do with all of these feelings and with the truth about who they are? What do I do with this? So that answer of decide, the core of it is to say, what is my next best step here? What does God want me to do with this in light of what I've felt and what I've seen as true and not true? And he may say, this is another area where, hey, girl, you're getting stuck in these traps, or this is something that you need to let go of. You need to surrender that she is not going to be able to be this woman that you want her to be as your mom. You need to let go of the fact that when this conversation comes up, she's not going to be able to go there with you. Or it might be taking responsibility for some of the ways that you have stepped in those traps and saying, it's time to go a different direction. It might be setting a boundary. I can still be in a relationship with this person, but this is the boundary of what I am able to contribute in this relationship and still stay healthy. The thing with boundaries is that boundaries don't mean rejection. Boundaries mean clarity. Boundaries don't mean rejection. They mean clarity. If we think of a boundary around a yard in a neighborhood, the boundary of a fence says, this is my property and that's your property. That's all what it says. It's not meaning that I reject my neighbor because there's a fence there. It just means this is the line legally between my property and yours. It's very evident. If it's on my side of the fence, then I need to take care of it. If it's on the other neighbor's side of the fence, they need to take care of it. It's clarity. So we're not cutting off people. We're creating guidelines for how we interact so that the relationship has the best chance of being healthy moving forward. That's what boundaries are doing. They're creating guidelines for how to interact in a healthy way moving forward. And we can do that with compassion. We don't have to be rude about it. We can be firm, but we can have love as we are being firm. We don't have to defend. We don't have to over explain. We don't have to justify. We can just state what that boundary is. We can say things like, I love you. And because I love you, I need to put a boundary right here. I need to take a step back to honor what's best for both of us. I need to have this space to process some of these things. Or honestly, we can set boundaries and not even have to tell the other person. If you are concerned about, if I was to say that, that would be World War III in my family. So start with just saying, what are the boundaries that I'm going to have inside of myself? I don't have to announce that to my parent and tell them that this is the boundary that I'm doing. You can decide, okay, I am going to curtail the conversation should it start to lean toward this direction where it starts getting toxic in some of these areas that this emotionally immature parent is. I am going to limit the amount of time that I spend with this person. I'm going to only share the parts of me that I know are not be exposed, because sometimes we do this thing in these relationships with emotionally immature parents where we're trying to overshare as a way to say, hey, I'm going to share this because I love you. And we feel trampled on because we don't feel like it's acknowledged or celebrated. So we can say, wait, I'm going to stop doing that. Not to be mean, but to protect myself in that. And that is so hard because we want to have these relationships where it's open and honest and all of these things. And it's not that we're not being honest. We're just saying, I understand that for me to be whole, I have to put up this boundary. I have to have this clarity and not a rejection. In order for me to keep in this relationship, this is the part that only I can go to right now, unless things change. We can still honor our parents. That's what's important in this. Exodus 20:12 says we are to honor our parents. We can still honor our parents and serve them well. And we can honor our own soul. We can honor what God has called us first and foremost to do as humans, which is to serve Him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is the first commandment. And then love one another as you love yourself. We start by first serving God with our entire beings. And part of serving God is not serving man, not deciding I'm going to make this decision to say this to this person just to keep the peace. So how do we love without losing ourselves? It's a tough question. It doesn't mean rescuing. It doesn't mean absorbing the emotional shrapnel that comes. It doesn't mean being someone where you're just making the peace. Let God help you as you're making these boundaries, decide what love looks like in this season. Sometimes love means fewer visits. Sometimes love is listening and not fixing them or trying to change them. Sometimes love is saying, I am going to love you from a distance. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to cover you, but I'm not going to be able to be as enmeshed in your daily life as I once have been. What do we do afterwards? The way I think of it is like, if you live in an area, like for example, I live in Southern California. So if you live in Southern California, you have an earthquake kit, you have earthquake supplies, not because you walk around every day expecting there to be an earthquake, but because at some point there probably will be an earthquake and you have supplies there to prepare your family. Same thing. You live in the South, you have hurricanes, you have tornadoes, you know that they're probably going to happen at some point. So you have a way to keep yourself protected should that happen. We can set up these things in our hearts with these emotionally immature people. We're setting these things up so that if there is a trigger, if there is something that happens, we have the earthquake toolkit. If I could use that analogy, we have the earthquake toolkit right there to say, okay, it's time for me to go run a quick errand if you're staying at their house or something, or it's time for me to just not talk about that anymore. That's not really something that's helpful because I know I'm only going to be hurt if I just continue on sharing in this way with them. These are the kind of things that we can do to prepare ourselves, not to live in the expectation that it's going to be awful, but to say, I'm ready should the triggers come. So, lastly, I just want to say you're not a bad daughter for feeling like you need boundaries, for feeling like things are not where you want them to be. You are deeply loved by God. And my guess is, I don't know your parent and I don't know the situation, but I would guess that you're also deeply loved by your parent, even if they are showing it in a really not healthy way right now. My guess is that they probably still do really love you. And that's hard to hear. I may have opened a lot of stuff in this conversation today, so I invite you to process this, to think about this. Reach out to me at aliciamichelle.com and let's start a conversation around this. I respond to every email I get, and I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on this. I do have resources to help you learn the emotional management tools that you need to be able to make decisions in these areas. One of them is the Emotional Confidence Club. This is a group of ladies where we talk through some of the things we mentioned in the book. We have a 7-step roadmap where we are helping you learn these 7 different aspects of emotional management, emotional confidence, building it into your life, working on it in real time, meeting every week and talking about these topics, having accountability from the other ladies who are going through it. I would love to have a conversation with you to see if you would be a fit for that group, because what a great tool. Everybody needs these sort of tools in their lives to deal with this, especially if they're dealing with an emotionally immature parent. All right, friend, take care, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thanks for joining me today. For full show notes and helpful next step resources, visit aliciamichelle.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd be honored if you would leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week.